Running a practice can be scary. Thanks to Therapy Note's streamlined platform and legendary customer support, it doesn't have to be. Combining billing, scheduling, telehealth, e-prescribe, and more into one easy-to-use platform, it's no wonder they're the number one choice for mental health professionals everywhere. Try it for 2 months free today using promo code MODERN. This episode is also brought to you by Buying Time. Since 2007, Buying Time has supported entrepreneurs and therapists on their admin, marketing, and bookkeeping needs, and so much more.
Check out their free Buying Time Systems Inventory Checklist to uncover hidden expenses and optimize spending in your practice at buyingtimellc.com/MTSG.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhelm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things going on in our profession, the things that affect the ways that we practice. And we are once again visiting artificial intelligence. And I don't know, about a year and a half ago, we had done an episode about, is AI coming for your job? And we are here to definitively tell you they already have. They are doing it well. And this is going to have some bigger implications for the way that we practice, the ways that things like managed care end up looking at it, all sorts of questions around, can they really call it that are so far undefined, but probably. And here to help us with that conversation today is our very good friend, Dr. Ben Caldwell.
Thank you, Curt. Thank you, Katie. Good to be with you both as always.
So you've been on the show like a million times, but for folks who somehow haven't heard who you are and what you're putting out in the world, can you share that with them?
Happily, yeah. I'm Ben Caldwell. I'm a licensed MFT in California, and my company is High Pass Education. We do continuing ed stuff and exam prep.
You have been writing some blogs lately about some artificial intelligence. You've been on your usual lecture circuit. You've been talking about AI quite a bit lately. And as we start many of our episodes, as you've been putting this information out there, what are you finding that other mental health professionals are kind of getting wrong about AI right now?
Well, I think it's not so much that therapists are making some enormous mistake around AI. Most of the discussion that I hear among therapists about AI has to do with documentation. And that is good, necessary conversation about, do we need client consent and how do these different documentation systems work in terms of the level of PHI that they use. But I'm talking more in my discussion about AI actually providing therapy services. And I think the overwhelming majority of clinicians that I know that I've talked to about it have no idea how far out of the station the proverbial train already is. The level at which AI therapists are already providing therapy, and the degree to which a lot of stakeholder interests are going to be aligned in making AI therapy widely available at low cost. Of course, that's going to impact us. But when I start talking with therapists about it, most folks I know just aren't aware of where the technology is right now.
But I think a lot of folks are also saying, well, this is wrong and it'll never replace therapists. And there's a lot of denial, a lot of anger. And then there's also, I think, legitimately some concerns about what this means, not just for our own businesses and our profession, but for clients. So in reading the article, you mentioned one of my favorite names in all of the world, which is Wellbot.
Yes.
I love that name, although I wasn't super excited about it when I first heard about it. I don't know that I'm excited about it now. But Wellbot, W-O-E, bot, is one of the first I heard about like years ago that had started down this path and is one that you're saying now is actually doing potentially some decent work. What does AI therapy actually look like right now?
So most AI therapy right now is in the form of chatbots, and Wellbot is a great example. Wellbot is a company that has sort of chosen to go down the regulatory path. And what that means is that right now, what Wellbot does has careful guardrails around it, has a lot of supervision, and is in the process of getting registered with the FDA as a medical device. And that's a really important distinction when we think about the regulatory framework. Medical devices are regulated at the federal level, unlike therapists who are regulated at the state level. And so right now, what Wellbot Health can do is, with significant limitations, can be prescribed by a physician for what amounts to sort of supervised work in the treatment of postpartum depression. It's a very limited, narrow set of uses. Again, careful guardrails. What they are wanting to do clearly is work within the federal regulatory framework to get broader recognition as a medical device for additional uses. And that's one path that these companies can pursue. And certainly Wellbot has come a very, very long way from its origins. It's come a long way even in the past year or two. There is a great deal of existing research on Wellbot and its work that seems to suggest, even in randomized controlled trials, that Wellbot is in some ways comparable to a human therapist. And just to be clear, from a philosophical standpoint, I don't believe that the human connection between client and therapist can ever be fully replaced by technology. I think there is something important, something even kind of magical in that connection that is by itself healing. But as we'll discuss here, AI gets better and better all the time at approximating that kind of a relationship. And for a lot of clients and other stakeholders, I think that approximation is going to be close enough.
I remember a blog article that you had written several years ago testing Wellbots. This was probably 2017 or so, where just typing in, "Hey, I'm suicidal," and its responses were, "Oh no, that would make people sad." And it has really transformed over the last 7 years to be a lot more responsive. But I do hear in a lot of the discussions that I have around AI, this point that you're bringing up, that is, oh no, the therapeutic relationship can never be replaced. And now I'm thinking it's just going to take some kind of MRI machine or something that just like triggers people's mirror neurons in addition to these things that will totally replace us at some point in the future. But until we get there, are clients actually using these kinds of programs?
Yes. And that's one of the things that I think most therapists just aren't aware of, because it's not part of our day-to-day world. That article that you're referencing, by the way, it's on my blog site, psychotherapynotes.com, but I actually didn't write that article. That was my friend Jeff Liebert who wrote that article. It's fantastic. It's well done, but it is, as you said, a few years back. And the technology has come a long way since then. Wellbot says on its website that it has already provided more than 77 million minutes of support to clients. And they talk about how usage spikes between 8 and 11 p.m., those times when people might most acutely need a therapist, but have the most difficult time actually connecting with a human therapist, because a lot of human therapists, for various good, understandable reasons, don't want to work that late into the evening. So for clients, having Wellbot available on demand, it's actually a pretty great resource. There's another company or another AI system called Wysa, W-Y-S-A, and they're taking a different path in terms of the regulatory framework, where they are advertising their service is mental health support or mental health coaching. They're being pretty careful to avoid using the terminology of psychotherapy in the US because of regulatory concerns. But they say that their site, their platform, whatever you want to call it, their AI therapist, has already had more than 500 million conversations and delivered more than 2 million sessions of CBT. That is a tremendous amount of therapeutic work that these chatbots have already done.
What do those sessions look like? You said it's chatbots. I know a year and a half ago, Curt mentioned it. There was Tessa, the eating disorder hotline chatbot. that had a curriculum loaded in and was providing prompts and conversations based on that curriculum. I think it was probably CBT based, but I don't know that for a fact. And when it was tested, when it was brought online, before the end of the day, it started telling folks who are calling an eating disorder hotline to diet and all of those things that we really don't want them to do.
Right.
And so what's changed? How is the work looking? What is the work looking like? And what really does this resource provide to clients?
It's a great question. And part of the difficulty of the conversation is that different chatbot systems work differently. If you look at something like Wellbot, at least from how they have described their work publicly, there are some pretty careful guardrails in that system. It is heavily scripted, and it has very limited opportunity to be generative, to develop novel kinds of responses that would then run the risk of what you're talking about. Or like we saw in the news a few months ago, Google's AI system for a while was telling people to put glue on their pizza, right? We don't want AI therapists telling people that kind of thing. But so there are really careful guardrails there. If you look at other companies developing AI systems, the level of guardrails that they are using, the level of scripting that they are using, as opposed to allowing their AI therapists to be generative, it's going to vary from one company to another. So it's tough to treat this as a monolith. But certainly, what guardrails are necessary and appropriate for AI therapy is a great question that we should be asking. And alongside that is the question, who's responsible for putting those guardrails in place? Because if you take a company like Wyza, and this is not in any way a knock on the company, it's just pointing out a difference in regulatory frameworks. They're not, to my knowledge, going through that FDA federal device registration process. So their accountability in terms of guardrails on providing good services really kind of comes from the market and whether people are willing to use it and feel bothered enough by bad outcomes to sue them for fraud or other things. And again, not a knock on the company at all. This is not a statement about their quality. They've got some what seem to be pretty positive research findings so far. But if you look at Wellbot, if there's negative research that comes out, if there are bad things resulting from those chat conversations, well, then the FDA can step in as a regulator and say, we're not going to move you forward in the process of device recognition. There's not that same kind of regulator in place for these devices that are not advertising themselves as therapy and not working toward that kind of registration, but are more in the consumer space of mental health support or coaching.
Not only does Therapy Notes combine the basic tools you need to succeed in your practice, but they also offer an ever-growing library of outcome measures, custom forms, secure messaging, and more. And with their always available live customer support 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, help is just a phone call or email away. Try it for 2 free months today using promo code MODERN. So all of the state licensure boards are really proactive on this right now and are taking all kinds of steps to protect our licenses and even just the terms like therapy, correct?
Unfortunately, no. But I think it's important to hold in mind here that I think a lot of folks have questions about, is this my job? If you're a licensing board for human therapists, do you even have any ability to regulate what a medical device can do or what it can call its work? I don't know. And I'm not sure that they know either. You can look at what happens at the state level in terms of title protection and practice protection, that you need to have a certain license in order to call yourself whatever that title is and offer this particular service under this label. But because medical devices are regulated at the federal and not the state level, I'm sure licensing boards are, to whatever degree they're actually looking at the issue, I'm sure they're kind of scratching their heads wondering if they even have a mechanism. Like, let's say they find an AI company that is out there doing something that the board thinks is inappropriate. Well, licensing boards tend to exist in this world of administrative law. They can issue licenses and they can revoke licenses. There's not a ton else that they can do. So for a medical device company that's not trying to get or stay licensed as a therapist, a board might not be the regulatory avenue. State legislatures might be the regulatory avenue. They can be the ones who can change statute about, well, what can these kinds of services truly call themselves? But, and I know we'll get there in a minute, I don't know that state legislatures are going to want to do that, because the motivations of other policymakers, I think, are going to lean in the direction of making AI therapy widely available at low cost. So we wind up in a situation where I think nobody really knows whose job it is to police this stuff.
Well, and to get to that next point, I don't know that people are going to want to do that, because this is theoretically a way to address access, a way to address the cost of mental health services. And so my assumption, and I'd like you to talk more about it, is that people, not necessarily therapists, but people will want this to continue to move forward as a way to make mental health support more available.
100% agree. And I think every audience except human therapists like us is going to be very much in favor of the widespread, ready availability of AI therapy. And of course, everybody has an interest in making sure that it's safe, making sure that it continues to improve, making sure that it doesn't give people unproductive, harmful, or even dangerous guidance. But if you look at the different audiences, so regulators will want AI therapy to be widely available, because right now, not enough people can get therapy. We know there's a tremendous amount of need around us that is not being met because there simply aren't enough therapists. And regulators have not shown the appetite to take more drastic steps to create a larger population of licensed therapists. Things like making the requirements for licensure easier, offering provisional licenses to people who haven't yet passed a clinical exam, or getting rid of a clinical exam entirely. Those are all steps that could immediately increase the population of licensees, but there's not a great appetite among legislators to do that. So AI therapy gives them a way to help solve this access issue, and to do it at relatively low cost. Bear in mind that state governments are also big purchasers of mental health services through their state and county systems. So even at the state level, we're in California, if they can make AI therapy available to Medi-Cal recipients, that's actually going to save the state a ton of money. They're going to be happy to make that change. If you look at insurance companies, they're facing the same problems. This falls under the banner of network adequacy for insurers, but basically it comes down to there are some insurers that keep getting fined because they don't have enough therapists to provide adequate access to care for the people who have health insurance that ostensibly covers mental health care. If they can contract with one of these AI companies and use AI therapy even as kind of an adjunctive support or as a stopgap until somebody can meet with a human therapist, and they can do it at really, really low cost, then they're going to go back to their regulators and say, we have solved our network adequacy problem. And not only that, but we're now able to make services more widely available in people's preferred languages, with some sort of cultural context and cultural appropriateness to it, if AI functions as well as it theoretically can in terms of the customization of treatment. So insurers and regulators are going to be on board. And for clients themselves, I think we as therapists understandably underestimate the degree to which clients are going to really want this service. There was one study, and we don't have great research on this yet, but there was one study a couple of years ago out of Turkey. And that study basically asked people from the general public their opinions about AI therapy. Would they prefer a human therapist or an AI one? They asked a bunch of related questions. And more than half of the people in that study said that they would prefer an AI therapist to a human therapist. And it's for all the reasons that you might expect. It's the lower cost. It's the fact that they don't have to go through the hassle of scheduling an appointment. It's because they know an AI therapist can't judge them the way that a human therapist might. And an AI therapist is not bound by state lines in the way that human therapists are. You put all of that stuff together with low cost, and of course, a lot of clients will take advantage of that option once they know it's available to them. It's really only us. It's only the human therapists who might be in a position of saying, wait a minute, hold on. I don't know that this is a good idea. Everybody else is going to be on board.
I'm starting to wonder if you just wrote this from AI and all of your talking points are coming from the AI itself. This sounds incredibly just pro AI without addressing any of the things like ethical concerns or any of this kind of stuff. And for those who are unaware, I'm taking comments from one of your posts on LinkedIn and what some of people's responses seem to boil down to, which is, which AI companies are paying you, Ben?
No AI companies are paying me. This is simply my effort to kind of inform people about where the technology is. And listen, I don't land in a place that is particularly pro AI or anti AI. I really deeply struggle with this question of access, knowing that for an awful lot of people, we're not talking about the difference between an AI therapist and a human therapist. We're going to be talking about the difference between getting therapy from an AI therapist and not getting care at all. And so the question then becomes for those folks, is some level of treatment through AI therapy better than nothing? I really, really wrestle with that. I don't know where I land. It changes day to day. But I do think that these are services that already exist, where public knowledge and utilization of these services is going to continue to grow, where there need to be guardrails. And I'm not sure that any public entity is in a position right now to take responsibility for making sure that those guardrails exist, leaving aside those companies that are going through like FDA approval process. So there are real and significant ethical concerns here, but I just think a lot of us aren't aware of how far down the road we already are. And I think that some therapists, understandably, look at AI therapy and they say, well, it's kind of in the uncanny valley stage, right? You can tell when you're talking to a robot, maybe not immediately, but usually pretty quickly. And to that, I would say a couple of things. One is that some other research shows us people might actually prefer the robot. And that goes back to, again, the fact that robots can't judge you, will remember what you've said, et cetera, et cetera. I think we overestimate the degree to which the general public cares a ton about meeting with a human person. But the other thing is, if you look over historical timelines and you think about, like, I always go back to Tom Hanks in Polar Express as the example of this. Like, Tom Hanks in Polar Express is the example of the uncanny valley, where he was that character, and it's a good movie. That character at the time was the best that technology could get us in terms of motion capture and expression capture, trying to show us a human character in animated form. But it wound up coming across to a lot of folks as kind of wooden,
creepy.
And creepy, unreal. But then you look today at the very realistic and believable de-aging of Indiana Jones. That progression didn't take all that long, historically speaking. And that is the same kind of pathway that we are on with AI therapy. Again, I don't think it's ever going to fully replace that human relationship that I think is so important, so healing, so magical. And people who have concerns about AI talk about AI being unable to act as what they would call a moral agent. Like, it doesn't have the ability to ethically reflect on its own work. It offers an approximation of therapy and not therapy itself. Those are all very real concerns. But again, I think for a lot of clients and other audiences, it's going to be close enough. And so we have to think through, what does that mean for my practice then, and how I can thrive in a world where cheap, readily available AI therapy exists and is being used.
When you hire Buying Time, you get an entire team of accountable, knowledgeable virtual assistants with different specialties. It's a pretty amazing one-stop shop for your business needs. And I should know, I've been a happy customer of Buying Time since 2015. Buying Time has helped me and other therapists with admin and client customer service, finances and bookkeeping, including sending out invoices and super bills, setting up automated systems to take care of clients during onboarding, marketing, websites, social media, blogs, newsletters, and a whole lot more.
Buying Time believes in streamlining efficiency and being cost effective, so they help you to regularly evaluate systems to make sure you're not paying for programs and platforms you don't need. And they put together a free systems inventory checklist to help all of us to uncover hidden expenses and optimize spending in your practice. Go to buyingtimellc.com/MTSG to get your free checklist now.
I want to get to that question, but before we head there, I still have a question on what AI therapy actually is. Because what you've described, it's mostly chatbots. Oftentimes it seems to be drawing from, curriculums to CBT or defined interventions. And
Yep.
I think about a lot of the self-help apps that have come out over the years, whether it's Calm or like all the different ones, right? There's something that people can log into at any time, get some specified education, really. Maybe there's availability for questions. To me, that isn't therapy, that's psychoeducation, or that's some sort of self-help. What are we differentiating between that and AI therapy? I'm not quite clear what we're actually talking about.
Well, and that's a fascinating question. It gets to sort of what you call therapy and what you don't call therapy.
Sure.
And if you have a chatbot that is working from a defined curriculum, think about how much over the past couple of decades therapists have worked to manualize the approaches from which we practice and try to standardize practice a bit from one clinician to another. So we are often talking about, manualized to the point of being almost scripted approaches to treatment. Now, what these chatbots tend to offer is not the level of depth and personal growth that some long-term therapy clients might reasonably want and expect. Instead, they tend to get built toward particular therapeutic tasks and, again, more manualized approaches. There's a reason why a lot of these AI chatbots are being built with CBT specifically in mind. Manualized approach, definable tasks, things that you can look at in small chunks to see, did this particular specific intervention work as intended? For those clients who want that sort of deeper, longer term work, I don't know that the technology is sort of there yet, but there certainly are companies working in that direction. And so, if you want to get into a philosophical discussion about the definition of therapy, I think that's actually a worthwhile conversation to have. APA, the American Psychological Association, specifically defines therapy as a service provided by a qualified professional, meaning a person. So under the APA's definition, no chatbot can offer therapy because it's not a human relationship. But if you look at sort of the delivery of therapeutic interventions with the intention of treating a defined mental health issue or a mental health diagnosis, then absolutely, that's what these companies are offering. And again, right now, it tends to be text-based, it tends to be chatbots, but the technology already exists. that if you or I or anybody else wanted to, well, let me back up a little bit. So I do a lot of teaching and training, right? And so I see this stuff in the teaching and training world where there are companies, I could go to their studio right now today, and they could spend the day engaging in a process with me of motion capture, voice capture, sort of video capture to get my expressions 3D modeled as closely as they can. And they would create an avatar of me, basically a three-dimensional looking video image of me. And then I could give their technology a script for a training that I want to do. And I could do little things in that script to talk about points of emphasis when I want to drop my voice, etc. And they can give me a video that looks, sounds, and moves like me, delivering the script that I have given them. It is a very, very short walk from that to the script being dynamically generated in conversation. So right now, most of what we have are chatbots, but this is going to be very similar to one-on-one video-based therapy very quickly.
So for our audience who are now looking at bajillions of competitors coming in the form of chatbots and that kind of stuff, what can they do to protect their practices and their jobs going forward?
I think it's a great question. And there are two ways that we can look at that, right? One way is, how do you interact with AI systems if you want to make that part of your work, if you want to be involved in that world? And first and foremost, I would suggest that folks pay really careful attention to the privacy policies and practices of those companies, because again, they're not all created equal. And what they do with user data, the various ways in which they protect or commercialize user data, is going to be different from one company to the next. That's even true with documentation stuff now. Some of the AI documentation companies, they use session recordings to generate first drafts of progress notes. Others don't. Some of them don't want protected health information. They will tell you specifically not to use any PHI. But if you give it a little bit about what happened in session, it will generate a note for you based on that. And then you can kind of plug in the client specific information. So there's a really broad range of how these companies use data. And if you want to be involved with the AI world, that's an important thing to pay attention to. If you don't want to be involved in that world, if you're interested in protecting your practice, making sure that you can thrive in this very rapidly approaching world, I think there are a handful of things that you can do as a therapist that AI is unlikely to be able to do on its own in the short to middle term future. So things like diagnosing. Diagnosing is still very much the realm of people, very much the realm of trained professionals. AI can't do that at this point. And I do foresee a possible world where some therapists act kind of in the way that many psychiatrists do now, where maybe you do an intake with a client, issue a diagnosis, and I'm using this term loosely, not technically, you sort of prescribe, in air quotes, AI-based therapy for this person's problems. Then you become sort of a supervisor of that AI therapy. You become a person that the client checks in with once in a while if the AI therapy goes wrong or if it doesn't seem to be working. But most of what you are doing is that initial intake, diagnosis, and then I'm here for you if you need, right? So that's one possibility. You can specialize. If you are someone who works with more involved kinds of disorders, with longer term treatment, with some of the more particular forms of therapy that AI is not currently pursuing, then I think you're probably safer. I think AI is coming first to replace those of us who primarily do one-on-one telehealth-based therapy with adult clients with kind of garden variety problems. So anxiety, depression, etc. The more you specialize, I think the more protected your practice is.
You're saying specialize as well as work with more challenging clients. So those of us who would prefer to work with the worried well, good luck keeping that population.
Yeah.
I just want to, because I could specialize into a very nice little niche of worried well. That's not going to help me.
Yeah. And listen, I think there's always going to be a market for people who very much want to work with a human therapist. And that
Sure.
includes that kind of worried well population. But I think that market is probably going to get smaller as more of it's going to be taken up by AI. The market of worried well who wants to work with a human therapist, as that market shrinks, it's going to be comparatively wealthier. And so if you're one of the therapists who you don't want to do anything about this rapid approach of AI, you want to just keep your practice as it is right now, working with those worried well kind of clients, that's great. More power to you. I think it is going to become more difficult to compete. I don't think your market's going to disappear, certainly not overnight, and maybe not even in the long term, but it is going to shrink to some degree, and it's going to be harder for you to keep that same kind of practice going. I think if you work with couples, families, and kids, you're safer because AI is not currently capable of doing that especially well, to my knowledge, especially if you're working with folks in the room. That's just harder for AI to intervene in a way that we would with our physical bodies, moving people around the room or getting down on the floor to play with a kid. Those kinds of practices I think are probably better protected. And then if you are up for it, not every therapist is, and I certainly understand if you're not up for it, I think there is going to be demand from the AI companies to have therapists involved in helping train the AI therapists, in flagging those.
Boo.
That's okay. I think some of the companies, and maybe not all of them, but some of them are going to want therapists involved in training the AI, flagging conversations that produce bad outcomes or that, metaphorically speaking, tell clients to put glue on their pizza, and making corrections to their models so that they will continue to get better. Now, a lot of therapists like Curt, and honestly like me, this is kind of where I land too. I'm not interested in that kind of a role. I would be too uncomfortable with that, even though overall I'm not all that pro or con either way. But I wouldn't want that kind of a role for myself in training the AI systems. But for those therapists who do want to be involved in the development and the improvement of the technology, I think a lot of these companies would be happy to have you.
It's such a challenging time, I think, for therapists because I'm going to use a cliche here, but big tech has definitely come for our jobs from a lot of different angles. We've got from the insurance side, where these gigantic group, quote unquote, group practices where individuals can barely even negotiate with insurance companies anymore. And really, it doesn't make sense for individuals to take insurance in a lot of cases. There's the AI tech that's coming in to potentially do AI therapies or really raising the bar of what would qualify someone to, maybe for insurance purposes, but maybe even for their own pocketbooks, qualify for human to human therapy. And so, the profession that I keep thinking about is like tailors and folks who actually make individual clothes versus all of the warehouses that just make these clothes that work for everybody. I buy clothes that are probably mass produced. And what you're talking about is really refining your practice to be exceptional with a specialized practice that is not easily treated by anyone else, or potentially cater to the most wealthy, and especially the most wealthy who want their privacy and don't want to be putting their data into a chatbot.
Right.
And so it really shifts, I think, what our profession is or could be. And I don't know if I have a question about it, but I feel okay. That's what my practice kind of is. But I don't think that there's a lot of therapists who are ready for this.
And I don't think that the graduate programs are preparing new students for this and the upcoming changes that are happening in our fields yet either.
I would agree with that. And I think, again, it's not that therapists are making some horrible mistake here. I think it's just that a lot of us are not aware of how far this technology has already come and how close we are to what I think is going to be a really significant shift in how people access mental health care. So my semester at CSUN just started yesterday, and I started talking with my students about this. But quite honestly, I scratched the surface last year, and I hadn't been talking with students about it before then. Because this is such a rapidly developing area, I think a lot of us are not prepared for it. And some of preparing for it really amounts to thinking through, what kind of practice do I want to have, especially in a world where clients can access AI therapy for less than $10 a session? How am I going to set myself apart in a way that clients will be interested in, take me up on, and frankly, pay me more money for? I do worry about the possibility of kind of a two-tiered system where human therapists, with a lot of privacy protections and other guardrails that are built into the licensure process, are available for the wealthiest and those in the most need, while AI therapy with far less consumer protection is what gets offered to everybody else. And I think each of us has to decide for ourselves, what role do we want to play, either in that kind of a world or in pushing back against the momentum that would take us there.
So if people want to find out more about these updates, where can they find out as you continue to put out new information about this and about the other cool things that you do in general?
Well, thank you. So my articles about this topic are at the blog site psychotherapynotes.com. And all the other stuff that I do, the exam prep, which we just released some fun new features for, continuing ed, all that kind of thing, that's all at highpass.com, HIGHPASS.com.
And we'll include links to those in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. Follow us on our social media. Join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on with this conversation. And until next time, I'm Curt Whithelm with Katie Vernoy and Dr. Ben Caldwell.
A big thanks again to our partner, Therapy Notes, helping clinicians everywhere care more and worry less. Check them out at therapynotes.com. And don't forget that using promo code MODERN gets you 2 free months.
Buying Time is a full-service virtual support agency that is standing by to support you in your practice. It's time for you to get out of the day-to-day and bring in someone you can trust that has the experience to help you with all your business needs.
And don't forget to go to buyingtimellc.com/MTSG for your free systems inventory checklist. Get on the path to less expenses and more profit.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.